Welcome. I'm Jesse Spencer-Smith, and I'm Chief Data Scientist at the Data Science Institute at Vanderbilt University and Professor of the Practice in Computer Science.
And I'm Doug Schmidt. I'm a computer science professor here, also at Vanderbilt University, where I've worked for many years with my two colleagues, Jules and Jesse.
And I'm Jules White. I'm an associate professor in computer science, and I'm the associate dean of strategic learning programs in the School of Engineering.
So we've had a number of really interesting questions from viewers from our previous workshops on ChatGPT. We'd like to take time to answer two of them. Let's start with a question concerning education. Can you see education systems adapting this technology in any way to supplement learning? What are your thoughts, Jules?
Yeah, well, I think there's some really interesting capabilities. I mean, one thing that I myself have learned through using these tools is that their ability to allow you to ask questions and get sort of immediate answers. Now, knowing, of course, you have to know that the answers may not be correct, which is part of the learning experience as well. But the ability to go and take a topic and go and explore it interactively, it's kind of like having a one-on-one office hours with a faculty member on demand. So I think this is one of the capabilities that's a really interesting, use of these tools. And so the ability to go in and pick a particular, topic that you feel like you'd like to dig into deeper. And then as you get explanations, be able to also take those explanations and say, can you, give an example in this particular context, and be able to adapt the explanation that's being given to a particular context. That's a really exciting thing that you can't easily do on your own. You can certainly go and read a textbook, but in many ways, this is like an interactive textbook to some degree. Now, it's a textbook that may have errors, and of course you have to error check it. But, by going and interacting with it, you can also go and kind of help discover and try to figure out where the contradictions are and try to be also on your toes about, does that make sense? So partially knowing that it has errors makes you have to question what it's saying, and that in turn makes you have to think more to some degree when you're exploring it. I think a second use that's really interesting is to be able to create educational experiences where you give students an introductory prompt. And so I've done some examples of this, for example, in my cybersecurity class, where I say, act as a Linux computer that's been the victim of a cyber attack. And whatever I type in, give me the output that this input would produce on the Linux command line. So this is acting it to pretend to be a computer and to pretend to give you the same outputs that you would get from the real computer. And then the student can go and explore the computer, trying to figure out, what did this cyber attack do, and see if they can learn how to interact with the computer and learn how to explore a computer that's a victim of a cyber attack. You can do similar types of things where you can ask it to create games and say, create a game, about organic chemistry or math with fractions, and ask me questions and tell me how I'm doing, give me hints where I need to. And so you can actually have it sort of flip the script and begin asking you questions. So a lot of these interactive uses, I think, are going to be a really interesting new way of building educational experiences to supplement what's going on in the classroom and to supplement, textbooks and existing, videos and other learning materials that we have.
Doug, what do you think?
So one of the things that has made computer science challenging for a lot of learners over the years is the relative solitude of being a programmer or a developer. Oftentimes you're expected to do a lot of work by yourself, especially as a student. We discourage people from working collaboratively because each student's work is supposed to be their own. And sometimes that means that when you run into the inevitable roadblocks, when you're trying to solve problems with programming languages and computing technologies, you're not really quite sure where to turn for help. And traditionally in our classroom environments, we have office hours with the faculty, we have office hours with the TAs, but there's an awful lot of time when you're stuck on something and you really can't afford to wait a couple of days to get a hint. And so I find, from my own perspective as a teacher, that I use LLMs in general, and of course ChatGPT in particular, as a way to be a trusted or quasi-trusted companion, to ask questions, get a feedback, see if it can get me unstuck, give me some pointers to the places that I need to go to make my problem-solving skills a little sharper and a little bit more accurate and more timely. So I think from the point of view of education, that's one of the main ways we're going to be seeing people using these tools in our courses, not just the computer science courses, but beyond, as a way to sort of serve as a mentor or a guide. One of the other things that's very popular in theory is the concept of pair programming. where the idea is to team up a pair of programmers to work with each other collaboratively, because two heads are better than one, and four eyes often see problems more than two will. But the problem with that in practice is, of course, there's undercode issues with doing that if you're writing your own program. And in terms of industry use, oftentimes people can't afford to hire a second expert to sit side by side with somebody else. So to the extent that tools like ChatGPT and their integration into our modern integrated development environments like IntelliJ and so on become very commonplace, people will be able to leverage these tools to help assist them in a way where you simply couldn't do it with a human without taking too much time away from somebody else's responsibilities and daily tasks. So those are a couple of things that I see as basically serving as an aid or a facilitator, something akin to Jarvis from the Avengers and Iron Man movies. And right now, as Jules alluded to, this can be a little tricky because oftentimes ChatGPT will hallucinate and give you wildly incorrect answers. But to his point as well, part of the learning process is to trust but verify. And this is a very important skill that people need to learn, not just in the technical fields, but in all fields, that we don't necessarily want to take anything we learn electronically or through any other means at face value. So I think some healthy skepticism fueled by alternative learning paths are really going to be essential if you want this technology to work and scale over time.
So it sounds like it's useful technology, even in its very early stages, because we still really are very early stage. And some of the exciting recent developments are, for example, frameworks which allow you to much more easily point ChatGPT or GPT-4 or other chatbot type models at resources and say, answer this question using only the information that is available here. And as we've talked about in a paper, actually, prompting it to actually state the facts that it's using when it's giving responses and sort of allowing you to be more a critical reviewer. A second question that we had was how do you employ ChatGPT in your faculty role? So, and Doug, you started to answer that. I'll toss in mine. I really like to do formative assessments. I like to give students an opportunity to assess what they know, when they know it, in a really low stakes manner. But the problem is creating those quizzes. And that's always tough to do, to create the quizzes that you need for that. And what I'm finding is that ChatGPT is really good at that, especially if I give it the document that I want to have those quizzes on. But I got to put a little bit of a spin on it because we're still early days, is a bug or a bad information bounty. So answer the question, but if you don't find the answer in this multiple choice, present that as a mistake and you get extra credit for this. But I can generate, I can take whatever articles I want and I can generate as many questions as I want to give to students and actually have ChatGPT itself format this. And so it's easy to give to them as well. So that's one use that I'm finding really valuable in my own teaching right now. Jules, what about you?
So I've been really interested in how do I teach students to use it more effectively. So, a lot of what we've seen in the news and other things is just, ask it a question, get an answer. But really, to get a lot of the interesting stuff, you have to iterate on a topic and you have to know the right structure to the language in order to ask the question. So people have talked about this, prompts or the inputs that you give it, the text, like a question would be a prompt, and then you get an output from that. And so knowing how to write the prompts is really important. So I've been doing a lot of work of trying to understand, like, what are the patterns that I should be teaching students for writing these prompts and which ones are going to be the most helpful to students. And then other things that I think are helpful is like having them be able to take output that it produces and see what needs to be improved. How do you refine it? How do you, incorporate it into a larger, system or document or whatever it is. And so trying to figure out how to teach students the skills of, one, how to structure those prompts, how to write them effectively. What are the techniques to use? But then also, like, how do you get that information or that product out of the system and use it and integrate it into a whole? Because a lot of what we're doing right now is generating short things and then going and using them some bigger whole. And so you have to think sort of very, very systematically about how am I going to ask it for different outputs that I need, and then how am I going to integrate them and put them together. And there's lots of different approaches and sort of ways of going about that. So that's one of the things I've been looking at. The other thing I'm really interested in is, using it for assessment. So everybody's, there's a lot of people that are worried about this for assessment because they say, well, now students can answer the questions. But I think one of the really interesting use cases is to give students ChatGPT, but in a controlled sort of version where I control the initial prompts or a set of the prompts and have them go and interact with it. And then I can see basically a history of their interactions with ChatGPT and how they went and solved a particular problem and, interacted, because their interactions with ChatGPT can show things about their problem solving and thinking abilities underneath the hood. So I think it's a really interesting use case. And for a big class, with 40 people, I might not be able to schedule one-on-one meetings for like an oral exam with every student, but I can have them all go and interact with ChatGPT, and it's sort of kind of like a quasi, oral exam in some ways, and that they can interact with it in this very free form way. Now, there's still a lot of things to work out, like the fact that different students are going to get different sort of paths through this exam. So it's still not something where I would give it as an exam and make it high stakes. But I think it's something where you can help use it to collect, information about how students are thinking about different problems, where maybe they're getting stuck, and help them also kind of test their own knowledge by interacting with this as a kind of a sort of a lightweight assessment tool.
Doug, how about you?
So I use ChatGPT in roughly 3 general categories in my teaching these days. First, I use it in order to make myself a more effective teacher. I teach courses related to mobile cloud computing. So we have some of the technology running on a mobile device like an Android or an iPhone, and some of the technology runs back up in the cloud somewhere, doing various database operations and processing requests concurrently and so on. And it turns out that there were gaps in my knowledge of my own education that made me less effective to teach the full spectrum mobile cloud computing experience end to end. So I've been using ChatGPT for the past couple of months to brush up on some topics I previously wasn't very well versed in. And this allows me to do very targeted learning, just-in-time style learning, without having to go off and take a master's degree in database programming, for example, which I just simply don't have time to do. But now I can teach much more interesting examples. I can use ChatGPT to help make my programming assignments more interesting. So that's kind of the way it makes me a more effective teacher. I also encourage my students to use it when they're trying to solve the programming assignments by using it as a way to answer questions that they may have. Of course, we have class discussion forums, and I'm always happy to answer students' questions. But increasingly, when someone asks a very general purpose question, I often try to encourage them first to go to ChatGPT to see if they can get a satisfactory answer. And only if they can't, or the answer comes back in a hallucinatory way, will I then go and actually answer the question myself. And oftentimes, I'll try to use ChatGPT first, or I'll go use classic Google searching just to see if I can find good answers. So I find that's another good way to teach people to be more self-sufficient by leveraging the technology. And then the third way I've been employing it is to help create more interesting assessments, typically online quizzes or online exams. And there, it's both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in the sense that when I come up with quiz questions, I ask ChatGPT what its answers will be. And if it gives me back a bunch of great answers very quickly, that's an indicator I probably haven't asked a very good question, because it's too easy for my students to do the same thing. So that's the curse part. You have to think more about your quiz questions and other things you might give in a somewhat internet-enabled environment for assessment. But I also find that it helps me think more deeply about how to make my quiz questions more contextual and more recent. So ChatGPT in general doesn't really know anything past September 2021. So forcing me to update to newer technologies so I can keep one step ahead of what ChatGPT can answer out of the box. And number two, I try to ask questions that are more relevant to the actual discussions that we have in class. And among other things, that makes it harder for students to use the tool inappropriately, but it also requires them to come to class and pay attention, which is another boon. So ironically, the use of automated technology actually helps facilitate more in-person learning if you use it effectively.
Well, thank you all for all of your great questions. Hope you'll join us again as we continue answering questions about ChatGPT. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.